He thought he was stopping for a dog trapped on a frozen rail line, but the way it looked at him felt like a warning, not fear. The ground began to tremble as a freight train approached, and he had seconds to choose between walking away or stepping back into something he once swore to leave behind. When he finally cut the wire and pulled the dog free, it didn't run. It turned back, again and again, like it needed him to see something he couldn't ignore. What it led him to wasn't a hidden danger, but a man, forgotten, freezing, and still holding on to a life no one else believed he had the right to keep. And in that moment, the hardest choice wasn't saving him. It was deciding whether he had the right to change him at all. Some rescues aren't about pulling someone out. They're about staying when leaving would be easier and learning what that really costs. Where are you watching from, and what would you have done in his place? If this story speaks to you, please like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers so we can keep telling stories like this. The road along the industrial edge of the city didn't ask for attention. It existed the way old things often did, quietly, without promise, without apology. On one side, the dark stretch of frozen water lay hidden beyond a wall of leafless trees. On the other, the skeletal remains of factories stood in long rows, their windows black, their steel frames catching what little light the winter sky allowed. Marcus Hale drove through it without music. The heater in his truck worked unevenly, breathing out pockets of warmth between longer stretches of cold. He didn't adjust it. He rarely adjusted anything unless it failed completely. The habit had stayed with him. Don't fix what still functions, even if it doesn't feel right. He had spent the day replacing broken hinges on a warehouse door 20 miles south. Cash job, no paperwork, the kind of work that didn't ask questions about where you'd been before or why you didn't stay there. His hands still smelled faintly of oil and metal. A worn toolkit rested on the passenger seat, straps cracked from years of use. He kept it within reach out of instinct, not necessity. In another life, tools had meant control, something you could rely on when everything else slipped. He hadn't unlearned that. Outside, the wind dragged snow low across the asphalt in thin, shifting lines. Not a storm, not yet, just the early movement of something building. Marcus slowed as the road narrowed near the old industrial spur. Most people avoided this stretch, not because it was dangerous in any obvious way, but because it felt abandoned in the wrong direction, like a place that hadn't decided whether it was finished or just waiting. A rusted sign leaned near the ditch, its lettering long faded. Beyond it, the ground dipped slightly where the rail line cut through. The tracks ran parallel to the road for a short distance, then veered off toward the back of the old plant. They looked unused. They always did. But Marcus knew better. He had been told once, months ago, by a maintenance worker he'd met at a gas station. Line still runs, not often, mostly at night. No signals out there anymore. The man had shrugged when he said it, like it didn't matter. Marcus had remembered. He eased his foot off the gas as he approached the crossing. Not a full stop, just enough to feel the space. That was when he noticed it. Not the sound, the movement. A faint vibration ran through the steering wheel, so slight it could have been mistaken for rough pavement. But it wasn't irregular. It had rhythm, a low, distant pulse. Marcus's eyes shifted to the tracks. For a moment, nothing. Then he saw it. Something dark near the rails. Moving, but not moving freely. A shape that didn't match the ground around it. He slowed further. The shape lunged once, then stopped short. Again. Then he saw the leg. The dog was large, German Shepherd by the look of it. Black and muted gold, its coat dulled by grime and winter. One hind leg twisted at an unnatural angle, caught in a loop of wire or metal debris wedged between the rails. It pulled hard, desperate. The wire held. Marcus didn't stop immediately. His hands tightened slightly on the wheel, but the truck kept rolling forward a few more feet. The vibration in the road deepened. He knew what it meant. The train wasn't close yet, but it was coming. He could keep driving. Someone else might see it. Or not. The dog lunged again, this time slipping, its body hitting the frozen ground with a dull impact. It scrambled back up, breath visible in sharp bursts, ears high, then flattened, then high again. No barking, just effort. Marcus drove another 10 feet. Then he exhaled once, slow, controlled, and pulled the truck to the side of the road. The engine idled. For a moment he didn't move. The world outside the windshield looked exactly the same as it had seconds ago. Wind, snow, steel, distance. Nothing asked him to get out. Nothing told him to stay. His fingers tapped once against the steering wheel, twice. Then he reached for the toolkit. The door opened with a hard metallic click. Cold air rushed in immediately, sharp enough to sting the inside of his nose. He stepped down into the snow, boots sinking just enough to remind him the ground was less stable than it looked. The dog saw him then. It froze, completely. No movement, no sound, just eyes. Amber, darkened by shadow and strain. For a second, neither of them moved. Marcus closed the distance slowly, boots crunching over frozen gravel and packed snow. The vibration underfoot was stronger now. He could feel it in his knees. He crouched a few feet away. Up close, the details sharpened. The dog's coat wasn't just dirty, it was layered with the residue of its environment. Oil, dust, old snow melted and refrozen into thin, hard patches. A faint scar ran across the bridge of its nose. One ear stood fully upright, the other bent slightly at the tip as if it had never healed correctly. The leg was caught in a twisted loop of industrial wire, the kind used to bind scrap metal. It had tightened under strain, digging into the fur, pressing deeper each time the dog pulled. Marcus set the toolkit down. "Easy," he said, voice low, even. The dog didn't relax, but it didn't lunge either. That was enough. He reached slowly, opening the kit with practiced movements. The metal clasp snapped softly in the cold. The vibration grew stronger. Marcus didn't look back at the tracks. He already knew. He pulled out the cutter, a compact, worn tool, edges still sharp from careful maintenance. The dog shifted, muscles tightening. "Don't," Marcus murmured. Something in his tone, steady, unforced, seemed to register. Not trust, not yet. But a pause. He slid one gloved hand toward the trapped leg. The dog flinched, teeth flashing for half a second. Not a strike, just a warning drawn from instinct. Marcus didn't pull away. He adjusted his angle instead, lowering his body, making himself less direct, less threatening. The wire was thicker than it had looked from a distance. Of course it was. He positioned the cutter, squeezed. Nothing. The metal held. The vibration under them was no longer subtle. It rolled through the ground in waves now, steady and undeniable. Marcus shifted his grip, repositioned the jaws of the cutter deeper into the twisted section. The dog's breathing quickened, chest rising and falling in sharp bursts. Its eyes never left him. He squeezed again. The tool bit this time, slightly. A small give in the metal. Not enough. Marcus exhaled, slow, adjusted, squeezed harder. The wire creaked, resisting. The ground trembled. And somewhere beyond the curve of the tracks, still out of sight, a low metallic roar began to build. The sound reached him before the light did, low at first, then gathering. Not a roar yet, more like pressure, something building in layers beneath the air. Marcus didn't look up. He didn't need to. The track beneath his boots was already speaking in a language he hadn't heard in years, but never forgot. Timing, distance, margin. He shifted his weight lower, one knee pressing into the frozen gravel. The cutter bit into the twisted wire again, jaws slipping slightly before catching. The metal was cold enough to feel brittle, but not weak. It had been tightened too many times by the dog's struggle. "Hold," he said under his breath. The dog's breathing came fast, sharp, controlled bursts that edged toward panic but didn't quite cross into it. Up close, the smell of wet fur, rust, and something older, oil maybe, hung in the air. Its eyes were locked on him, not pleading, measuring. Marcus adjusted his grip. The gloves dulled sensation, but he kept them on. He'd learned long ago that skin wasn't worth trading for precision. He squeezed. The wire gave a fraction more this time. A soft internal crack that didn't break clean, just shifted the tension. Not enough. The vibration surged. He could feel it now in his spine, in the back of his jaw, the kind of deep resonance that traveled through bone before it ever reached the ear. The dog jerked suddenly, instinct breaking through restraint. Its teeth flashed again, not toward him, but toward the pressure, the pain. Marcus didn't pull back. Instead, he leaned closer. "Easy," he said again, quieter this time. Not command, not comfort, just presence. The dog froze. Not completely. The tremor still ran through its body, but it stopped fighting him. That was the difference. Marcus repositioned the cutter deeper into the twisted knot where multiple strands overlapped. This wasn't a clean loop. It was a mess of compressed metal tightened by fear. He squeezed again, harder. The tool groaned faintly. The wire resisted, then shifted. A sharp edge snapped loose, grazing his glove. The The dog flinched but didn't pull away. The sound behind them changed, closer now. The low build had turned into something defined, metal against metal, rolling forward with certainty. Still out of sight, but not far enough to ignore. Marcus didn't turn. He didn't look. He calculated. Seconds, not distance. He adjusted again, angling the cutter at the narrowest point. Squeezed. This time the wire split, not fully, but enough to loosen the tension. The dog felt it immediately. It pulled, once, hard. The remaining strands tightened again, biting deeper into the fur. Marcus swore under his breath. "Don't!" he snapped, sharper now. The tone changed something. The dog stilled, not obedient, but focused. Marcus shifted closer, his shoulder nearly brushing its side. The warmth of its body was surprising against the cold air, alive in a way that felt immediate, urgent. He wedged the cutter back into place. The ground shook harder. The sound, no longer distant, filled the space behind him, rushing forward like something that couldn't be negotiated with. For a brief second, an old memory flickered through his mind, not fully formed, just the edge of it. Dust, pressure, a voice shouting something he hadn't heard in time. He pushed it away. Not now. He squeezed. The final strand snapped. The tension released all at once. The dog yanked its leg free, too fast, too strong. Momentum carried it sideways, its body colliding into Marcus's shoulder. The impact knocked him off balance. His boots slid against the frozen ground, and both of them went down hard into the snow just beyond the rail. And then, the train. It tore past them in a blast of wind and sound that flattened everything else. The force hit like a wall, ripping the air out of his lungs, driving snow into his face in sharp, stinging bursts. Marcus rolled instinctively, turning his back to the track, one arm braced against the ground. The dog was beside him, pressed low, body tight against the earth, ears flattened completely now. The train didn't slow. Car after car thundered past, metal screaming against metal, the vibration turning the ground into something unstable, shifting under pressure. Marcus kept his head down, counted without counting, not cars, time. When it finally passed, it didn't stop so much as withdraw, sound peeling away into the distance, leaving behind a strange, hollow quiet, the kind that always followed something loud. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. The air felt different, thinner. Marcus pushed himself up slowly, brushing snow from his sleeve. His shoulder ached from the fall, but nothing felt wrong. Not yet. He turned his head. The dog was already on its feet. It tested the freed leg cautiously, placing weight on it, then shifting, adjusting. A slight limp, but functional. It didn't look at him right away. It scanned the track first, then the empty road, then, finally, him. They held that moment longer than expected. Marcus didn't step closer, didn't reach out. Whatever came next didn't belong to him. The dog took a step back, another. Its body angled slightly away, but its head stayed turned toward him, not retreating, considering. Then it did something that didn't fit. It stepped forward again, quick, controlled, and caught the edge of his jacket sleeve between its teeth. Not hard, not aggressive, just enough to hold. Marcus stilled. The dog pulled once, released, then turned and moved a few steps toward the far side of the rail, stopping just beyond the ditch. It looked back. Marcus didn't move. The dog waited, not impatient, not panicked, just there. It turned again, trotting a few more yards into the darkness between the industrial buildings, then stopped once more. Looked back again. This time, it didn't come closer. It didn't try to grab him again. It simply stood there, body angled forward, head turned just enough to keep him in view. Marcus exhaled slowly. The road behind him stretched empty in both directions. No headlights. No sound except the wind brushing across broken structures. He glanced at his truck. Still idling, still warm, still an option, the dog shifted its weight slightly. Not a command, not a plea. A decision already made, waiting to see if he would match it. Marcus looked down at the cutter still in his hand. A small piece of wire clung to the blade, bent and sharp. He reached down, wiped it clean against his glove, then slid it back into the tool kit, closed the lid. The click sounded louder than it should have. He didn't rush, didn't call out. He simply stepped forward, one boot sinking into the shallow drift beyond the rail. The dog didn't move immediately. It watched him take 2 steps, 3. Then it turned and continued ahead, not fast, not slow, just far enough to keep him following. The dog didn't rush. That was the first thing Marcus noticed as he followed it off the road. It moved with purpose, but not urgency, the kind that comes from panic. Its pace was measured, adjusted for the uneven ground, the slight drag in its hind leg now that the wire was gone, but the strain remained. Marcus kept a few steps behind, not because he was cautious of it anymore, but because he understood something instinctively. This wasn't his lead to take. The industrial structures ahead rose like broken ribs against the sky. The closer they got, the more the air changed. The smell shifted from cold metal and snow into something heavier. Oil, damp fabric, old smoke that had settled into surfaces and never fully left. The dog slipped between two leaning chain-link panels where a fence had once held a boundary. Marcus paused there for a moment. Not long, just enough to register the space. There were signs of passage, compressed snow, faint tracks layered over each other. Not many, not recent either, the kind of place people passed through, not stayed in. He stepped through. Inside, the ground dipped slightly, forming a shallow basin shielded from the wind by the surrounding debris. It wasn't visible from the road. You had to know where to look, or be led. The dog moved ahead, weaving between scraps of metal and broken pallets, navigating the space with familiarity. Marcus followed, slower now, not scanning for threats, observing. There were remnants of habitation, but not in the way most people would recognize. A rusted barrel turned on its side. A section of tarp tied down with care, not desperation. Footprints that didn't scatter randomly. They followed patterns. Someone had lived here, or still did. The dog approached a low structure tucked near the far wall, a makeshift tent assembled from canvas, plastic sheeting, and pieces of salvaged wood. It wasn't large, but it was deliberate, angled to block wind from the north, weighted at the corners, maintained. The dog stopped at the entrance. It didn't go in immediately. Instead, it turned its head toward Marcus, not inviting, not warning, acknowledging. Marcus stepped closer. The flap hung half open, stiff with frost. He reached out, pushed it aside just enough to see inside. At first it looked empty. Then he saw the shape. A man lying on his side, partially covered by a wool blanket that had been folded, not thrown, around him. His back was straight, even in that position, not curled inward the way most bodies did when they tried to hold on to heat. Marcus crouched slightly, adjusting to the dimness. The man was older, early 60s, maybe. Hard to tell exactly. His face carried the kind of wear that came from years of physical work rather than age alone. The skin was drawn tight along the cheekbones, not from malnutrition, but from something more gradual, like a body that had given away more than it had been given back. His hair was mostly gray, unevenly cut, as if done by hand without a mirror. His hands, resting near his chest, were large and rough, the knuckles thick, fingers marked with old scars that had healed without care. His breathing was shallow, too shallow. Marcus leaned closer. The heat hit him then, not warmth, but the kind that didn't belong. The man's skin carried it unevenly, a fever pushing outward while the rest of his body failed to hold it. Dehydration, maybe worse. "Hey," Marcus said, low. No response. He reached out, pressing two fingers lightly against the side of the man's neck. Pulse, weak, but there. The dog moved in then, stepping between Marcus and the man with quiet precision, not aggressive, just present. It lowered its head, placing its nose near the man's shoulder, then shifting slightly so its body covered part of him. Shielding. Marcus withdrew his hand. "All right," he said quietly. The dog didn't relax, but it didn't escalate either. That balance again. Marcus sat back on his heels, taking in the rest of the space. Everything inside the tent had a place, a metal cup, cleaned and set upright near the corner. A small stack of folded cloth, shirts maybe, lined against the side wall. A pair of boots positioned carefully near the entrance, toes facing outward, ready to be stepped into. And near the man's head, resting on a crate turned into a makeshift table. A hard hat, yellow once, now dulled by time, but clean, wiped down regularly, the surface free of dust even in this place. Marcus stared at it longer than he expected. It didn't belong to the environment, not like the rest of this did. The dog shifted slightly, drawing his attention back. Its eyes met his again. This time, something had changed, not trust, but expectation. as if the act of bringing him here had already assigned him a role. Marcus exhaled slowly, rubbing his gloved hands together once, not for warmth, but to reset. "You're not a stray," he said, almost to himself. The dog didn't react to the words, but its ears flicked. Marcus looked back at the man. "Can you hear me?" he tried again. This time there was movement, small. The man's brow tightened slightly. His lips parted, but no sound came out at first, just a dry pull of air. Then, barely audible, no." Marcus leaned closer. "What?" The man's eyes opened halfway, clouded, not fully focused, but aware enough to resist. "Don't," he whispered. The word was fragile, but it held shape. Marcus frowned slightly. "Don't what?" The man swallowed, the movement slow, painful. "Don't take me." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Take you where?" No answer. The man's eyes slipped shut again, his breathing uneven, slipping between shallow pulls and longer pauses that stretched just enough to notice. The dog shifted, pressing closer to him. Marcus sat there for a moment, the space narrowing around the decision forming in his chest. He'd seen this before, not the place, not the circumstances, but the refusal. It didn't come from confusion. It came from something held onto too tightly to be reasoned with. He looked around the tent again. Nothing here suggested chaos, no scattered trash, no signs of collapse. Even the water container near the entrance, half empty, was sealed properly. This wasn't someone who had lost everything at once. This was someone who had been letting things go in controlled pieces. Marcus stood slowly. The dog tensed, rising with him immediately. "I'm not moving him," Marcus said, voice steady. The words hung in the air between them. The dog watched him. Then, after a second, it lowered its body again, just slightly. Not agreement, but acceptance of the moment. Marcus stepped back from the entrance, letting the flap fall partially closed again. He didn't leave entirely, just enough distance to think. The cold hit him harder now that he wasn't focused on movement. He glanced back toward the road, barely visible through the broken structures, then back at the tent. His truck was still running, warm, available. He could leave, come back with help, or not come back at all. The dog pushed the flap aside and stepped out, standing in front of him again, closer this time. Its gaze didn't shift away. Marcus didn't speak. He didn't reach out. He just stood there, matching its stillness. The wind moved around them, low and constant, carrying the faint echo of something distant, metal maybe, or just the memory of it. The dog turned its head briefly toward the tent, then back to him. Marcus understood, not the situation, not yet, but the weight of it. He bent down, picking up a small length of wood that had been stacked neatly beside the entrance, turned it once in his hand, set it back exactly where it had been. Then he straightened. "I'm not done," he said quietly. The dog didn't react, but it didn't move away either. Marcus didn't go back to the road right away. He stood outside the tent longer than he needed to, the cold settling into his jacket in slow layers. The wind had shifted direction, cutting across the open lot at an angle now, carrying loose debris in low, restless patterns. Behind him, the truck idled somewhere beyond the fence. Ahead, the tent held its shape against the wind. Not strong, not permanent, but maintained. That was the difference Marcus couldn't ignore. Not abandoned, maintained. He pulled his gloves tighter, then stepped away. The dog, Briggs, didn't follow. It stayed at the entrance, half inside, half out, its body angled toward the man inside while its head tracked Marcus leaving. No barking, no pursuit, just awareness. Marcus didn't look back again. The city looked different when you came into it from that side. The industrial edges gave way to streets that had been patched more times than rebuilt. Buildings stood closer together, not because they belonged there, but because they hadn't been moved. Storefronts with lights on, but not bright enough to feel open. Marcus drove slowly, not searching for anything in particular at first, just letting the place narrow his options. He parked near a small clinic he remembered passing once before. Brick building, single story, the kind that didn't advertise what it couldn't guarantee. The sign outside read, "Community Outreach, Walk-in Services" in faded lettering. The door opened with a dull chime. Inside, the air was warmer but carried the dry scent of overused heating. A row of plastic chairs lined the wall. A table with outdated pamphlets, a counter with no one behind it. Marcus stepped in fully, letting the door close behind him. Somewhere deeper in the building, a voice spoke. Low, steady, not rushed. "We'll check that again tomorrow. No, not tonight. Tomorrow." The voice moved closer. A woman emerged from a hallway, holding a clipboard against her chest. She was in her early 40s, maybe. Hard to place exactly. Her posture was straight without being rigid, like someone who had trained herself not to lean on anything. Her hair was tied back low, dark brown, a few strands loose near her temples. Her face wasn't soft, but it wasn't closed either. It carried attention more than expression. She looked at Marcus once, quick and direct. "You here for something specific?" she asked. No greeting, no assumption. Marcus nodded slightly. "Depends." She didn't react to that answer. Instead, she set the clipboard down on the counter and crossed her arms loosely, not defensive, just still. "That usually means you don't want to say it out loud yet," she said, "which is fine, but I'm not guessing." Marcus studied her for a second. "You work the South Industrial Zone?" he asked. She didn't hesitate. "For a while." "Temporary housing setups, after the closures." Her eyes sharpened, not suspicious but focused. "That was years ago." Marcus nodded once. "There's still someone out there." That landed differently. Not surprising, not dramatic, but it shifted something behind her gaze. "People pass through," she said. "They don't stay." This one stayed. A pause. She looked at him more carefully now, not his face, but the way he stood, the way he chose his words. "Name?" she asked. "Don't know if he gave it to me," Marcus said. "Didn't ask." "That's not accidental." "No." Another pause. She picked up the clipboard again, flipping it once before setting it aside. "Lydia Shaw," she said. Not as introduction, as confirmation. "Marcus Hale," she nodded slightly. "All right, Marcus Hale, start where you need to." He didn't tell it all at once. He gave her pieces, the location, the tent, the condition, the refusal. She didn't interrupt, didn't write anything down. When he mentioned the hard hat, she looked away for a moment, not to avoid it, but to place it somewhere. When he repeated the words, "They'll write me down as something I'm not," she exhaled once through her nose, not frustration, recognition. "I've heard that before," she said quietly. Marcus didn't respond. She leaned back against the counter slightly, arms folding again, this time tighter. "What you're describing isn't confusion," she continued. "It's refusal." "I got that part." "Most people don't," she said. "They think it's fear or pride. It's neither." "What is it?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached for a pen, tapping it once against the counter, not thinking, just aligning her thoughts. "Did he have a hard hat?" she asked. Marcus nodded. "Kept clean." She gave a small, almost invisible nod. "Then I know who you're talking about." That came too easily. Marcus noticed. "You didn't need the name," he said. "No," she replied. "He stopped using it where it counts." She stepped around the counter, moving toward a back office. "Wait here," she said. Marcus didn't move. The room felt smaller now, more defined. After a minute, she returned, not with files, but with a jacket thrown over her arm. "We're not finding this in paperwork," she said. "You'll get half the story at best. The rest you ask someone who was there." "Where?" She glanced toward the door. 2 blocks down. Corner bar. Afternoon crowds light this time of night." Marcus frowned slightly. "You serious?" "I don't send people there for advice," she said. "I send them there for memory." The bar didn't have a sign that stood out, just a faded name painted directly onto the glass, partially obscured by years of weather and condensation. Inside, the lighting was low, but not dim enough to hide anything. Marcus stepped in, letting the door close quietly behind him. A few people scattered along the counter. No one looked up for long. At the far end sat a man who didn't blend in, not because he tried to stand out, but because he carried himself like someone who didn't belong to the room anymore. Broad shoulders, though they had settled downward over time. Dark hair streaked with gray, worn longer than necessary. A beard that had grown past maintenance but not into neglect. He held a glass but hadn't taken a drink in a while. Marcus walked over, stopping a few feet away. "Hank Rivera?" he asked. The man didn't turn immediately. When he did, his eyes moved first, quick, assessing, then settling. "Depends who's asking." "Someone who found Earl." That was enough. Hank's grip tightened slightly around the glass, not dramatically, just enough to register. He let out a small breath that might have been a laugh if it had gone further. "Still alive?" he asked. "For now." Hank nodded once. "Figures." Marcus pulled out the chair across from him, but didn't sit right away. "Mind?" Hank gestured vaguely. "Sit or stand. Doesn't change the story." Marcus sat. There was a long second where neither of them spoke. Then Hank leaned back slightly, eyes drifting toward the far wall. "He worked longer than anyone I knew," Hank said. "Didn't complain. Didn't ask for anything extra. Just showed up and did it." Marcus waited. "Then the accident," Hank continued. "Nothing dramatic, no explosion, just bad timing and worse decisions. None of them his." "What happened?" Hank shrugged. "Steel shift, load slipped. Took him down wrong. Should have been covered. Wasn't." Marcus didn't interrupt. "They patched him up just enough to say they did," Hank went on. "Then started writing him down as a liability. Not useful, not reliable, not fit." The word lingered. Not fit. Marcus's jaw tightened slightly. "They gave him options," Hank said. "Sign the papers. Accept the evaluation. Move into assisted placement. Start over as something else." And he didn't. Hank finally looked at him directly. "Would you?" Marcus didn't answer. Hank gave a short, humorless smile. "Yeah," he said. "Didn't think so." He took a drink then, small, controlled. "He walked," Hank added. "Not all at once, piece by piece. Job, address, records, everything that told them what he was." "And the dog?" Hank's expression shifted slightly. "Found her later, or she found him, doesn't matter. She stays with him." "She stays because he never tried to own her," Hank said. "That's different." Marcus leaned back slightly, letting the weight of it settle. "So he'd rather die out there," he said, more to himself than to Hank. Hank shook his head. "No," he said. "He'd rather not be rewritten before he does." Marcus didn't go back to the clinic. He didn't return to the tent either. Not yet. He stood outside the bar for a moment, the cold sharper now, cleaner somehow. The city moved around him in small, ordinary ways. Cars passing, lights changing, people crossing streets without noticing anything beyond their path. He looked down at his hands. Still steady. Still capable. That hadn't changed. What had changed was what that meant. He turned his head slightly, eyes settling somewhere beyond the buildings, toward the direction of the industrial edge, not deciding, not acting. Just holding the line between what he could do and what he should. Marcus didn't return that same night, not because he had decided anything, just because he understood that showing up again too soon would turn what he had seen into something else. Pressure, expectation, interference. So he went home. The house sat at the edge of town, far enough that the road quieted before it reached his driveway. A single light over the porch, nothing else on. He didn't turn on more when he stepped inside. The silence there wasn't empty. It was settled. He set the toolkit down on the table, removed his gloves, and stood still for a moment, letting the residual cold leave his hands in slow increments. Then he filled a container with water. Not a bottle, not something sealed. A plain dented metal canister he'd used before on jobs where plastic cracked in low temperatures. He added a second one, then a third. He didn't think about it as a plan. He didn't think much at all. The next morning came gray, flat, without sunrise. Marcus drove back before the city had fully woken. The road to the industrial spur looked the same. No new tracks, no signs that anyone else had come through. Good. He parked further back this time, cutting the engine before the usual spot. No reason to announce himself. The cold had sharpened overnight. Snow underfoot carried that brittle sound that came only when temperatures dropped low enough to strip softness from it. He walked in. The path he had taken before was still there. Subtle, but visible once you knew how to read it. Compressed snow where weight had passed, small shifts in texture, the fence opening, the basin, the tent. Briggs was outside this time. sitting, not guarding the entrance in a rigid stance, just present, its body angled so it could see both the approach and the tent behind it. It didn't move when Marcus stepped into view, but its head lifted slightly. Marcus stopped a few yards away. He didn't call out, didn't gesture. He simply lowered one of the metal canisters to the ground between them, then stepped back. Briggs didn't approach immediately. It watched him first, not the object, him. Marcus let his arms fall to his sides, waited. The dog stood slowly, testing its leg again. The limp was still there, but less pronounced now. It moved forward with controlled steps, stopping once before reaching the container. It lowered its head, smelled, didn't drink. Instead, it nudged the container lightly, as if checking its weight, its stability. Then it lifted its head and looked at Marcus again, a longer look this time. Marcus didn't respond. After a moment, Briggs turned and carried the container, not in its mouth but by pushing it carefully along the ground with its muzzle, back toward the tent. That was new, not acceptance, but use. Marcus exhaled once, slow, then he turned and left. He came back that evening, not at the same time, not in the same way. This time he brought a roll of heavy canvas and a length of cord. The wind had picked up again, dragging against the edges of the structures, finding seams and weaknesses. When he reached the tent, one side had already started to pull loose. Briggs was there again, standing, closer this time. Marcus didn't stop at a distance. He moved to the side of the tent, setting the canvas down without looking directly at the dog. "I'm fixing that," he said, voice even. Not asking, not announcing, just stating. Briggs shifted, stepped once toward him, then stopped. Marcus worked without turning his back completely, angled, aware but not defensive. He cut the torn section free, replaced it with the heavier canvas, securing it with tighter knots than before. His hands moved automatically, precise, efficient, but slower than they would have in another life. Deliberate. Briggs moved once behind him, crossing from one side of the tent to the other, close enough that Marcus could feel the movement, but it didn't interfere, didn't challenge. When he finished, he stepped back, checking the tension of the new material. The structure held better now, not permanent, but stronger. He picked up the scrap pieces, folding them instead of leaving them. A habit. He set them neatly beside the entrance. Then he stepped away. Briggs watched him go. Didn't follow. By the third day, the pattern had set itself. Marcus arrived, left what he brought, fixed what needed fixing, and left again. No conversations, no attempts to wake Earl, no checking pulse, no forcing water. He didn't cross that line, but he didn't ignore it either. He watched from the edges, measured changes, the position of the blanket, the level of the water container, the sound of breathing through the thin tent wall when the wind shifted just right. Briggs adjusted too. It no longer stayed outside when Marcus approached. Sometimes it remained just inside the entrance, half visible, half shadowed. Sometimes it stepped out, closing the distance slightly, but always stopping short of contact, always placing itself where it could intercept if needed. The boundary wasn't moving. But it was becoming clearer. On the fourth visit, Marcus brought food, not packaged, not labeled, simple, wrapped in cloth. He placed it near the same spot as before, stepped back. Briggs approached more quickly this time. It didn't hesitate as long. It nudged the bundle open, revealing the contents. Paused. Then did something Marcus hadn't expected. It didn't take the food inside immediately. It turned its head toward the tent, waited. A long, still second. Then, slowly, it picked up the cloth and carried it in. Marcus didn't move, didn't follow, but something in his chest shifted. Not relief, not satisfaction, recognition. Later that same day, he stayed longer than he had planned. Not close, far enough that he could see the outline of the tent but not be seen unless someone looked directly. The wind dropped briefly, leaving a pocket of quiet. In that quiet, he heard it. A voice, not clear, not strong, but there. Earl. Marcus didn't step forward. He didn't move at all. He let the moment exist without interruption. Then the voice faded again. The wind returned, and the space closed. That night the memory came back, not as a full image, just a fragment, a doorway, dust in the air, a voice behind him, steady, controlled, saying something he hadn't stayed long enough to hear. Marcus sat in the dark of his house, elbows resting on his knees, hands hanging loose between them. He didn't push the memory away this time. He let it sit, unfinished. The same way he had left it. The next morning, he returned again. Same approach, same distance, same silence. Briggs was waiting. Not at the entrance, closer. Halfway between the tent and where Marcus stopped, Marcus paused, not out of caution, out of acknowledgement. Briggs held his position, didn't lower its head, didn't stiffen. It simply stood there. Between, not blocking, not inviting, defining. Marcus set the container down, stepped back, and stayed there a second longer than usual, not testing, not pushing, just matching the moment. The dog didn't move, neither did he. The wind moved around them, pulling at loose edges, carrying the distant hum of the city that didn't know this place existed. Marcus finally turned, walked away, didn't look back. The storm didn't arrive all at once. It built. Marcus noticed it before the weather report caught up, subtle shifts in the way the air moved, the way sound traveled. The mornings came colder, but not cleaner. The sky pressed lower, holding something back. By the third day, the wind had changed direction twice. By the fourth, it stopped pretending. Marcus didn't wait for confirmation. He drove out before dawn, earlier than usual. The roads hadn't been cleared yet, and the first layer of snow was already drifting across the asphalt in uneven ridges. The truck moved slower than he liked, tires slipping just enough to remind him that control was conditional. He didn't push it. Speed wasn't the point. When he turned onto the industrial spur, visibility dropped another notch. The outlines of the structures blurred at the edges, half swallowed by blowing snow. He parked closer this time. Closer than before. The engine stayed running for a moment longer than usual before he shut it off. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was dense, filled with the sound of wind moving through broken steel. Marcus stepped out. The cold hit harder than the previous days. Not sharp, heavy. It pressed against his chest as he walked, settling into his lungs in a way that made breathing something you had to remember to do. The path into the basin had changed. Snow had covered most of the tracks, smoothing the surface into something uniform. Without memory, you wouldn't know where to step. Marcus did. He moved through it without hesitation, following the shape of the ground rather than what he could see. The fence opening was barely visible now. He stepped through. The basin felt smaller, not physically, but the storm closed it in. Tightening the space, reducing distance. The tent came into view. One side sagged under the weight of new snow. The canvas he had secured held, but barely. Briggs was not outside. That was wrong. Marcus didn't stop. He closed the distance in longer strides, boots sinking deeper now. When he reached the entrance, the flap was down completely. No movement, no sound. He pushed it aside. Earl lay exactly where he had before, but not the same. The stillness had changed. There was no rhythm to his breathing now, no uneven pattern to follow, just long stretches of nothing between shallow pulls that barely moved his chest. Marcus dropped to one knee immediately, reaching out, skin colder than it should have been, not frozen, but close enough. "Earl," he said. No response. He leaned closer, pressing his ear near the man's mouth. A faint exhale, too faint. Briggs moved then, from the far side of the tent, emerging from shadow, stepping between Marcus and Earl, but not stopping him this time. It didn't block, it didn't challenge. It simply stood there, close enough that Marcus could feel its presence without looking. That was the change. Marcus didn't hesitate, not this time. He slid one arm under Earl's shoulders, the other beneath his legs. The man was lighter than he should have been, weight reduced not just by time but by absence. For a brief second, Marcus paused, not because he doubted, because he understood. This was the line Earl had drawn, and he was crossing it. He lifted him anyway. The wind hit harder outside. The moment Marcus stepped out of the tent, the storm closed around them, pulling at his coat, pushing against his balance. Snow moved sideways now, not falling but driven, filling the air in thick, shifting layers. Briggs followed immediately. No hesitation, no attempt to stop him. That, more than anything, settled the decision. Marcus adjusted his grip, pulling Earl closer against his chest to shield what little heat remained. The walk back felt longer. Not in distance, but in resistance. Each step required intention. The ground shifted underfoot, uneven, hidden beneath fresh layers. Marcus leaned forward slightly, compensating without thinking. Behind him, Briggs moved low and steady, staying just out of his path. Not leading, not guarding, accompanying. Halfway to the fence, Marcus felt it. The familiar shift, not in the environment, in himself. A memory, Not visual this time, not fragmented. Clear. A hallway. A voice. Go. I'll hold. Marcus had gone. This time he didn't stop walking. The truck came into view through the white. Marcus moved faster now, urgency pushing through the resistance in his legs. He opened the passenger door with his shoulder, easing Earl into the seat as carefully as he could manage without losing time. Briggs jumped into the back without being told. It didn't settle. It stood, head forward, watching. Marcus slammed the door, circled to the driver's side, and got in. The engine was already warm enough. He turned the heat on. Not high, just enough. Too fast would shock the body. He knew that. His hands moved automatically, adjusting vents, positioning air, everything controlled, everything measured. The drive into the city was slower than he wanted. The roads had begun to close. Snowplows hadn't reached this section yet, and visibility dropped further with each mile. Marcus kept both hands on the wheel, posture forward, eyes fixed not on the road ahead, but on the edges, where shape still existed. In the rearview mirror, Briggs didn't move, didn't lie down, just watched. Marcus glanced once at Earl, still breathing, barely. The clinic lights were on. Lydia was there. She didn't ask questions when Marcus carried Earl through the door. She didn't need to. One look was enough. Inside, she said, already moving. Her voice had changed. Not louder, sharper, more precise. Marcus followed. The room they entered wasn't large, but it was prepared. Equipment already set in place, not waiting to be found. Hypothermia, she said, more to herself than to him. Possible dehydration collapse. She moved quickly, but not rushed. There was a difference. Marcus stepped back when she gestured, not out of the way, out of the role. She checked Earl's pulse, his temperature, his breathing. Then she looked at Marcus. Did he consent? Marcus didn't answer immediately. No, he said. Lydia held his gaze for a second, then nodded. Good, she said. Marcus frowned slightly. That's not what I expected you to say. It means he's still him, she replied, which means I know exactly what to do. She turned back to Earl. Temporary incapacity due to environmental exposure, she said, already moving toward a cabinet. That gives me a window. She pulled out supplies, IV kit, thermal blankets, oxygen. Marcus watched, not interfering, not helping, just present. Briggs didn't follow them inside. Marcus noticed only when he turned. The dog stood just outside the doorway. Snow clung to its fur, outlining its shape against the dim light. It didn't try to come in, didn't whine, didn't move. It simply lay down, head up, eyes fixed on the door, guarding something that wasn't there anymore. Hours passed without measure. Marcus stayed, not because anyone asked him to, because leaving didn't fit. At some point, Lydia stepped out, closing the door behind her. He's stable, she said. Not safe. Not better. Stable. Marcus nodded. That enough? He asked. For now. She looked toward the door. He won't like this, she added. I know. Doesn't matter, she said. He's here. Marcus leaned back against the wall, arms crossing loosely. Neither of them spoke for a while. The storm continued outside, muted now by walls and distance. Then Lydia said quietly, You crossed his line. Marcus nodded again. Yeah. She studied him for a moment. Then don't cross it again unless you mean it. Marcus didn't respond. He didn't need to. Outside, Briggs hadn't moved. Snow had begun to gather along its back, outlining the shape of a body that refused to shift. Marcus stepped out into the cold, standing a few feet away. The dog didn't look at him. Not immediately. When it did, the gaze was different. Not guarded. Not assessing. Something quieter. Marcus didn't step closer. He didn't speak. He just stood there, matching the stillness. Earl didn't wake all at once. There was no clean moment where breath steadied and eyes opened and everything turned toward recovery. It came in fragments, a shift of the hand against the blanket, a tightening of the jaw, a breath that lasted a second longer than the one before it. Marcus noticed each of them, not because he was watching closely, but because he didn't look away. The hospital room was small, functional, stripped of anything unnecessary. A narrow bed, a monitor that tracked more than it explained, a window that faced the side lot instead of anything resembling a view. Morning light came in dull and indirect, filtered through a sky that hadn't quite decided whether winter was finished. Marcus stood near the window, not sitting, not leaning, just there. Earl lay still for a long time, then without warning his eyes opened, not wide, not searching, just open. They stayed that way for several seconds, unfocused, adjusting. Then they found Marcus. There was no confusion in them, no surprise, only recognition, and something else, something that wasn't gratitude. Earl didn't speak. His throat worked once, dry, as if testing the idea of words, then stopped. Marcus didn't step closer, didn't fill the silence. He let it exist. It was Lydia who broke it. She entered the room with a clipboard in one hand, her coat half-buttoned, hair pulled back the way it always was, efficient, controlled, without wasted effort. She glanced once at Earl. "Good," she said, not softly, not warmly. "You're inconveniently alive." Earl's eyes shifted toward her. There was a flicker there, faint, but present. Not humor. Recognition of tone. Lydia checked the monitor, adjusted a line, then looked between the two men. "No paperwork yet," she said. "He's still under temporary hold." She said it like she was stating the weather, then she added, quieter, "But he's conscious now." That changed things. Legally, practically, humanly. Marcus understood the shift. Earl did too. For a while nothing happened. Earl stared at the ceiling. Marcus stayed by the window. Lydia moved in and out, doing what needed doing, leaving when it was done. Time didn't stretch. It settled with it. When Earl finally spoke, his voice didn't carry. It barely reached the end of the bed. "You shouldn't have." Marcus turned his head slightly. Not fully. Just enough. "I know." Earl's mouth tightened. Not anger, not exactly. Something closer to resistance without the strength to act on it. Earl stopped, breath catching. He swallowed, tried again. "They'll write it down." Marcus didn't answer immediately. He understood what Earl meant. Not the words. The fear behind them. Being recorded. Reduced. Filed. "You're here," Marcus said finally. Earl closed his eyes. Not in agreement, not in refusal, just closing them. Later that day, Marcus stepped outside. The storm had passed. What it left behind was stillness, the kind that followed disruption, when everything paused to assess what had changed. Briggs was there, in the same place, near the entrance, not inside, not moving. Marcus stopped a few feet away. The dog didn't rise immediately. It lifted its head first, eyes finding him, holding there. Then it stood. No stiffness now, no guarded edge in the movement, just deliberate. Marcus didn't step closer, didn't call it. He had learned that much. Briggs crossed the distance on its own, not fast, not hesitant, measured. It stopped within reach, close enough that Marcus could see the fine lines of its coat where snow had melted and dried unevenly. The scar at the leg, where the wire had cut, was healing, not clean, but better. Briggs looked at him. Not past him, not through him. At him. Marcus lowered his hand, slow, open. The dog watched the movement, then, after a moment, stepped forward the last inch. Its nose touched his glove. Light, testing. Marcus didn't move, didn't respond. He let the contact stay exactly what it was. Briggs withdrew on its own, turned, and walked back to the door. That evening, Marcus returned inside. Earl was awake, not fully alert, but present. The lines of tension in his face had changed, not gone, but altered, as if something had shifted beneath them. Marcus took a seat this time, not beside the bed, not across the room. A chair angled slightly away, giving both of them space without distance. Neither spoke for a long time. Then Earl said, "Dog." Marcus nodded once. Outside. Earl's hand moved slightly on the blanket, fingers tightening, then releasing. Marcus watched it. "That one stays," Earl said. Not a question. Not a request. A statement. Marcus didn't argue. "I know." The next days followed no pattern anyone would have called progress. Earl improved. Slowly, not dramatically. His strength returned in increments small enough to miss if you weren't paying attention. He drank water on his own, then food, then sat up for longer stretches. He didn't thank anyone, didn't apologize, didn't explain. The nurses stopped expecting it after the second day. Lydia never did. Marcus came each morning, and sometimes in the afternoon, not always at the same time, not for long. He didn't bring anything, didn't fix anything, didn't offer advice. He sat, or stood, or leaned near the window, and then he left. One morning, Earl was already dressed, not in hospital clothes, in his own, worn, cleaned as best as the staff could manage. The jacket didn't quite fit the way it should have, too loose now. Marcus noticed, didn't comment. Earl stood by the window, looking out, at nothing in particular. Marcus stepped in, stopped where he always did. Earl didn't turn. "They'll want something," he said. Marcus knew who he meant. Forms, explanations, placement. "Yeah," Marcus said. Earl nodded once, a small movement. "That's where it goes wrong." Marcus didn't answer, not because he disagreed, because he understood. Later that day, Lydia found him in the hallway. "He's going to refuse discharge options," she said. "Probably. You planning to stop him?" Marcus looked at her. "No." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Good," she said. "That wouldn't work anyway." She paused, then added, "He stayed." Marcus didn't ask who. He didn't need to. The morning they stepped outside together wasn't planned. No one announced it. No one prepared for it. Earl walked, slow, measured, each step deliberate, as if testing the ground for stability that might not hold. Marcus stayed beside him, not supporting, not guiding, just there. Briggs was already waiting. At the edge of the small courtyard, the moment Earl appeared, the dog stood, not rushed, not frantic, just certain. Earl stopped. The distance between them wasn't large, but it held weight. Briggs closed it, step by step, until it stood directly in front of him. Then it sat, not jumping, not pressing forward, just sitting, waiting. Earl's hand lifted, unsteady but intentional. It hovered for a second before settling against the dog's head. Briggs leaned into it, not hard, just enough. Marcus looked away, not out of discomfort, out of respect. They sat there for a while, all three of them. The bench was cold. The air still carried the edge of winter, but the sky had opened slightly, letting through a pale light that didn't promise anything, but didn't deny it either. No one spoke much. Earl said a few words, short, practical. Marcus answered when needed. Briggs moved between them once, then settled back at Earl's side. At one point, Earl glanced at Marcus. Not long, just enough. Something passed in that look, not gratitude, not forgiveness, something simpler, acceptance of presence. Marcus held it for a second, then let it go. Nothing resolved, no decisions were made, no paths declared. The future stayed where it belonged, uncertain. But something had changed, not in the world, in the space between them. Sometimes the most meaningful thing you can do for someone is not to fix their life, but to stay when it would be easier to walk away. Marcus didn't change Earl. He didn't solve his past or rewrite his story. He simply chose not to leave. And in that quiet choice, dignity was protected, not taken. In our own lives, we meet moments like this more often than we think. Not moments that ask us to be heroes, but moments that ask us to be present. To respect someone's struggle without trying to control it. To stand beside them without needing to be the answer. Maybe that's where grace lives. Not in grand gestures, but in steady presence. If this story meant something to you, share your thoughts in the comments. I'd really like to hear what part stayed with you. And if you believe stories like this matter, consider subscribing so we can keep telling them. May you find the strength to stay when it matters, and the wisdom to know when simply being there is enough.